If an animal pleaded for help in a way you couldn't ignore, would you break the rules to save it? That's what haunted Dr. Olivia Walker the instant she saw the German Shepherd, motionless and broken beneath the twisted steel and splintered timbers of the old service bridge. The Colorado Rockies stretched around her in stoic silence, pine trees shivering in the early autumn wind, the ground already crusted with frost. Olivia and her guide, Luis Ramirez, had set out at dawn. Olivia for a wildlife health survey, Luis for the paycheck and the adventure. Their boots crunched through icy underbrush. The river nearby hummed a nervous tune over boulders, hinting at winter's approach. They weren't supposed to stray from their designated trail, but Luis paused, squinting at something out of place on the riverbank below. "There's something there. Animal, I think," Luis said, his voice low but tense. Olivia felt that familiar tug of curiosity, a professional itch, but this time, as she peered through the binoculars, it turned to dread. The shape below wasn't a deer, wasn't a coyote. A battered German shepherd, half buried by the rubble of the collapsed bridge, tried and failed to raise its head. Olivia's first instinct was clinical: assess, report, follow protocol. Local wildlife policy was crystal clear. Animals in this condition, especially presumed strays, were to be humanely euthanized on the spot. It was the rule: efficient, practical, logical. But there was something about the dog's eyes, locked on hers even from a distance, an almost human plea, raw and undeniable. "We should keep moving," Luis said, but his tone wavered as he took in Olivia's set jaw. "I know what you're thinking." She knelt at the edge of the bank, studying the scene. The bridge, an old supply crossing, had caved in weeks ago after a flash flood. Splinters and steel beams jutted out like the bones of a carcass. The dog, fur caked in mud, ribs showing beneath torn patches, one leg twisted at an impossible angle, lay in a shallow, freezing puddle. Olivia saw the raw scrape of bone, the labored rise and fall of its flank, the frost forming in patches on its whiskers. The dog's gaze never left hers. No growl, no whimper, just that quiet, desperate appeal. She moved closer, Luis shadowing her, tension hanging between them like fog. "You know the rule, Doc. They say, if it can't move, if it's suffering." Olivia ignored him. "Give me your jacket," she said quietly, already sliding down the embankment. Luis hesitated, then shrugged out of his thick parka and tossed it to her. She wrapped it around the trembling animal, feeling a thin, rapid heartbeat through her fingertips. "Hey, buddy. You're not done fighting, are you?" she murmured. The dog's eyes flickered, then blinked slowly, as if answering her question. Olivia felt the weight of protocol pressing down, but the urge to act, to do something, outweighed it. Luis kept glancing over his shoulder. "If anyone finds out, no one's here. It's us and him." Olivia's voice was harder than she intended, but she didn't apologize. She was already running her hands over the dog's frame, cataloging injuries: shattered femur, probable spinal trauma, hypothermia. The dog barely twitched, but when her hands hovered near its chest, she felt the faintest thump, alive but fading. The wind shifted, carrying a chill that cut straight through her scrubs. Luis checked the radio clipped to his pack, static hissing from the speaker. "Signal shot. Closest ranger station's 10 miles east. You want to carry him out on foot?" "I can't leave him," Olivia said, her decision final. "If you want to go, I understand." Luis shook his head. "Not leaving you, Doc. But this is going to be trouble. Then we're already in it together." She worked quickly, using her field kit to start an IV of warmed saline, something she almost never did outside the clinic, especially not for a stray. "Ranger," as she would call him later, didn't fight her touch. Instead, he closed his eyes, as if trusting her with what little hope he had left. Dusk fell quickly in the mountains, turning the sky to bruised purple and silver. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off, and Olivia felt the primal isolation of the wilderness pressing in. She layered Luis's jacket and her own over the dog, lighting a small camp stove for warmth. The rules said to keep moving, to report emergencies, not to build a bivouac for a dying animal. But tonight, rules seemed distant, irrelevant. Luis boiled instant coffee. "You sure about this?" "No," Olivia admitted, "but I can't watch him die because it's convenient, because some policy says so." They took shifts through the night, Olivia keeping Ranger stable with gentle hands and whispered promises, Luis watching the tree line for trouble. Every few hours, the dog's eyes flickered open, always searching for Olivia's face, always that silent question, "Will you give up on me too?" When dawn finally broke, painting the mountains in rose gold, Olivia checked Ranger's heartbeat. Still there, still fighting, against every rule in the book, against the odds. One broken dog, one stubborn vet, one wild, lawless night that would change everything. Because sometimes compassion, not protocol, is what changes a life, or maybe an entire community. And on that cold mountain morning, Olivia chose compassion. The morning in the Rockies broke cold, sharp, and impossibly clear, as if the night's struggle had swept all softness from the world. Frost still clung to every blade of grass, shimmering beneath the pale pink sunrise. Olivia huddled close to Ranger, who lay bundled in layers of jackets, his breathing shallow but miraculously steady. Luis handed her a mug of scalding instant coffee, his eyes flicking between the dog and the tree line, as if expecting judgment to come striding out of the pines. Neither of them said much. The air was thick with the consequences of Olivia's decision, a choice she knew she couldn't unmake now. She pressed her stethoscope to Ranger's side. The dog's pulse was thready, but present. When she stroked his head, he gave the faintest twitch of his tail. That simple gesture, stubborn and hopeful, was enough to burn away the last of her hesitation. "We can't wait for a miracle," Olivia finally said, her voice ragged from cold and doubt. "He'll die if we don't move him. We'll have to make a stretcher." Luis exhaled, resigned. "You know, Doc, this is crazy. If the board hears you broke field protocol, let them hear it," Olivia shot back. "If they want to fire me, they can. But I won't leave him here to die alone, not after last night." Luis nodded, almost smiling at her defiance. "Well, let's get to work then." They foraged for branches, lashing them together with climbing rope and strips torn from Luis's spare shirt. The makeshift stretcher looked flimsy, but Olivia patted it with her sleeping bag, careful to minimize the bumps that would jostle Ranger's injuries. She gave him a mild sedative from her kit, whispering, "Hang in there, big guy," as she lifted him onto the stretcher. The dog whimpered, his eyes fluttering, but he didn't snap or snarl, not even in pain. That trust, so freely given, pressed at Olivia's chest. Carrying the stretcher was torture. Every step over uneven ground sent fresh jolts of pain through Olivia's knees and back, and Luis's breath steamed in ragged bursts. The woods were alive with sound now, a chorus of chickadees and jays, the far-off cough of an elk, branches creaking above them like the bones of the earth itself. Olivia's mind ran through every protocol she was breaking. She imagined the look on Dr. Bennett's face, the hospital board's emails piling up with words like liability and misallocation of resources. But with every mile, the decision felt less like a reckless impulse and more like a calling, a challenge to prove that compassion had a place in even the harshest environments. By noon, sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and her arms trembled with exhaustion. Luis stumbled and nearly dropped his end of the stretcher. Olivia bit back a curse. "We need a break. 5 minutes." She checked Ranger's vitals again. Still alive, but weaker now, his fur crusted with blood and dirt. Luis collapsed against a boulder, breathing hard. "I ever tell you I used to want to be a vet?" Olivia blinked. "Really?" "Yeah, I was a kid. Thought I could save the world, one animal at a time. But life got in the way." Olivia met his gaze, surprised by the vulnerability. "Maybe it didn't. Not completely." Luis smiled, then nodded at the stretcher. "Come on, let's save this one." Their next obstacle came without warning. A steep, rocky incline, half choked with deadfall and hidden holes. Luis nearly turned his ankle. Olivia's boots slipped, sending gravel cascading down the slope. The stretcher jolted, and Ranger whimpered in pain. For a split second, Olivia's resolve cracked. "We can't go back," she muttered. "We have to keep moving." After what felt like an eternity, they reached the weathered sign marking the ranger station trailhead. Relief nearly knocked Olivia to her knees. She keyed the emergency radio, her hands shaking, and relayed their position. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, flat and unhelpful. "You say you have a dog in need of rescue? That's not authorized for airlift. You'll have to bring it in on foot, or—" "Listen," Olivia snapped. "This animal is critical. If you don't want a public relations nightmare, you'll get that chopper here. I'm Dr. Olivia Walker, Colorado Wildlife Hospital. Look up my license if you need proof. We are bringing him in for treatment. Do you understand?" Silence. Then grudging agreement. "We'll send a helicopter. ETA 40 minutes. Luis gaped at her. "You just threatened to unleash the media on them." "I did what I had to," Olivia replied, rubbing her sore neck. "Sometimes you have to break the rules to do the right thing." When the helicopter finally roared overhead, the wash of wind flattened the grass, sending Olivia's hair flying. The medics on board shot her skeptical looks, but she met their doubt with icy determination. She briefed them on Ranger's injuries, refusing to let them treat him as just another lost cause. Luis squeezed her shoulder as she climbed into the cabin. "You did good, Doc, no matter what they say." The flight was rough. Air choppy over the ridges, the thud of rotors pounding in Olivia's chest. She cradled Ranger's head, feeling his heartbeat flutter weakly against her palm. The city shimmered on the horizon, the hospital's white walls rising from the forest like a promise. When they landed, staff rushed out, eyes widening as they took in the battered dog and the wild look on Olivia's face. She barked orders, ignoring the whispers. "Get the trauma kit. Page Dr. Bennett. Tell the board I'll file a full report later. Right now, this animal comes first." As they wheeled Ranger inside, Olivia felt the weight of her choices pressing down, but there was no room for regret. She'd crossed a line, but sometimes, she thought, rules only mattered until someone proved they needed to change. Tonight, in the wilderness, she'd chosen courage over compliance, and now the real battle was about to begin. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Olivia and the medics rushed Ranger into the emergency bay. The contrast between the wild, biting air of the Rockies and the sterile chill of the animal hospital hit Olivia like a slap. Her adrenaline, which had fueled every desperate step through the forest, threatened to ebb away, replaced by exhaustion and the weight of what she'd done. Dr. Eric Bennett, her mentor, the hospital's chief veterinarian, and the kind of man who measured every word, was already waiting, arms folded, face etched with skepticism. He took in the battered German shepherd, Olivia's mud-streaked clothes, and the knowing looks of the staff, then simply said, "Tell me everything." As Olivia rattled off Ranger's vital signs and the makeshift interventions she'd performed, Dr. Bennett's eyes remained coolly professional. He knelt by the stretcher, his gentle hands probing Ranger's spine and legs. His frown deepened with every finding: the ugly angle of the femur, the lack of reflex in the hind legs, the sluggish capillary refill. He looked up at Olivia, his tone soft but final. Spinal trauma, multiple fractures, severe hypothermia and dehydration. I won't sugarcoat this. Chances for recovery are slim, even with surgery. You know policy, Olivia. The words stung, but Olivia refused to flinch. I know policy. I also know what I saw in his eyes, Eric. He wanted to live. He fought through a night most wouldn't survive. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the beeping of monitors and the low whine of Ranger's breathing. Dr. Bennett straightened, the conflict written in his posture. We have limited resources. If you want to justify this to the board, you'll need documentation. Every sign of progress, every setback. If he's suffering, if his quality of life won't ever return. I'll take responsibility, Olivia said, surprising herself with the fierceness in her voice. I'll pay for any extra costs, work double shifts, whatever it takes. But please, let me try. Dr. Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. He's your patient, but you know the odds. Don't let your heart blind you. She didn't answer, but as she watched Ranger being prepped for surgery, Olivia felt a wave of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, fragile as spring ice. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of care, worry, and waiting. Olivia barely left the hospital, living on bitter coffee, stale vending machine snacks, and adrenaline. She kept a journal, at first for the board, but soon for herself, a daily record of Ranger's journey. She logged every medication, every tentative movement, every flicker of his ears when she spoke his name. Some days, progress seemed non-existent. Ranger's body was battered, his nerves were slow to respond. Twice his temperature plummeted in the night, sending Olivia scrambling for warming blankets and emergency fluids. Once a pressure sore threatened to become infected, and Olivia sat by his kennel for hours, gently cleaning and bandaging the wound. Yet there were tiny victories too. The first time Ranger lifted his head when Olivia entered the room. The day he licked water from her hand instead of turning away. The moment his tail thumped, barely but unmistakably, against the crate when she whispered, "Hey, fighter, you're still here, aren't you?" Olivia documented it all, her handwriting growing shaky but determined. Day 6, opened eyes when spoken to. Day 9, drank unassisted. Day 12, attempted to scoot front legs, minimal movement in hind. Day 17, no infection, appetite improved. Day 23, first tail wag. Not everyone was convinced. The techs whispered behind her back, muttering about wasted resources. One morning, as Olivia struggled to adjust Ranger's sling for physical therapy, a junior vet cornered her in the hall. "Look, I get it. Everyone wants a miracle. But this is a wildlife hospital, not a dog rescue. There are dozens of animals out there, wolves, owls, deer, who could use these meds and machines. Why does he get special treatment?" Olivia bristled. "Because he deserves a chance. Because he's fighting. And as long as I will too." But in the quiet hours, when the hospital was hushed, and the only sound was Ranger's labored breathing, Olivia couldn't help but question herself. Was she really helping, or only prolonging the inevitable? Was this about him, or about her own need to push back against a system that sometimes felt as cold as the mountain wind? One night, too tired to drive home, Olivia dozed on the cot beside Ranger's run. In a dream, she was back on the mountain, Ranger's eyes glowing in the moonlight, wordlessly pleading for another day. She woke with her cheek pressed to his flank, the dog's slow, steady breathing anchoring her in reality. Her journal became more than a medical record. It became her shield against doubt. She posted updates in the break room, hoping to show the others that Ranger was more than a hopeless case. She started snapping photos, tiny moments of progress, a tongue lapping water, a paw twitching in sleep. The first time Ranger rolled onto his side with help. The hospital board sent a tersely worded email demanding a formal review. Dr. Bennett, caught between sympathy and protocol, called Olivia into his office. "You're putting your career on the line, Olivia. You know that, right?" She nodded. "If I have to risk my career to do what's right, then so be it." He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Then I'll back your play. But I expect results." The stakes had never been higher. Every hour, every scrap of improvement mattered. Olivia knew the odds, knew that heartbreak might be waiting just around the corner. But she also knew, deep in her bones, deeper than any rulebook, that sometimes the most fragile hope was worth fighting for. And so the days marched on. Olivia, Ranger, and a future that remained uncertain but possible. Every morning, Olivia arrived at the animal hospital before sunrise, mug of coffee steaming in her gloved hands, the world outside still shrouded in mountain mist. Her routine became a kind of ritual. She'd pause at Ranger's kennel, quietly watching his chest rise and fall, searching for subtle signs. An ear flick, a nose twitch, anything to suggest he was still fighting. Each day started with hope, but no day was ever the same. From the beginning, Olivia noticed something remarkable. Ranger was different from any rescue she'd treated. He responded not only to touch or medication, but to her very presence. Even when his body was too weak to move, his eyes would lock on hers, tracking her as she walked the sterile tile floor. Whenever Olivia whispered his name, he would attempt to lift his head or wag his tail, drawing on some hidden reserve of strength. There was no denying it. A bond was forming, invisible but powerful, as if some unspoken contract had been forged that day beneath the collapsed bridge. Physical therapy became their battleground. Olivia, undeterred by skeptical glances, designed a regimen that combined gentle stretching, massage, and assisted walking with a makeshift sling. Some sessions felt like a triumph. Ranger bearing a fraction more weight on his front legs, or managing a few shaky steps with Olivia supporting most of his body weight. But other days were a test of faith. Sometimes he'd yelp in pain, or simply collapse in exhaustion, his gaze flickering with frustration and fear. Olivia's heart clenched every time he whimpered, but she knew giving up wasn't an option. Doubt, however, grew louder in the hospital halls. Staff members began to question Olivia's priorities, some whispering that she was wasting resources better spent on wildlife patients. One tech, Carla, confronted her bluntly after a particularly grueling therapy session. "Look, Dr. Walker, I know you care about this dog, but we're short-staffed. The deer in ICU needs that monitor, and people are starting to say you're letting your emotions call the shots." Olivia, still kneeling beside Ranger, looked up. "I hear you, Carla. I do, but I can't walk away from him. He's showing progress. Maybe not as fast as we'd like, but it's there." Carla shook her head. Frustration etched across her face. "We all want miracles, Olivia, but you're putting your neck on the line. Donors are already asking questions." The pressure weighed heavily. Some nights, Olivia found herself alone in the break room, scrolling through angry emails from donors or terse memos from hospital administration. One message cut deepest. "Is it ethical to allocate so many resources to one animal, especially when his prognosis remains so poor. Our mission is conservation, not sentimentality. The implication was clear. Her commitment was becoming a liability. But Olivia refused to give up. She began documenting every tiny success with more detail, determined to build a case not just for Ranger's life, but for compassion-driven medicine. She even started filming short video clips. Ranger lifting his head to her voice, stretching out his good paw, attempting to balance while she held the sling. The first time he managed to stand for 3 seconds, Olivia caught it on her phone, her voice shaking with excitement. "That's it, Ranger. You did it. You're still in this fight." It was Luis, her mountain guide turned confidant, who suggested sharing Ranger's journey online. "People need to see what you're doing, not just the science. Show them the story. Show them hope." With the hospital's reluctant permission, Olivia created a small blog and social media page, Ranger's Second Chance. She posted daily updates, photos, video clips, even handwritten notes from her journal. The reaction was immediate and divisive. Comments poured in, some from supporters moved by Ranger's fight, others from critics who accused Olivia of playing favorites and squandering limited resources. "What about all the other animals who need help?" one comment read. "You're doing God's work. Keep fighting," countered another. Olivia tried not to let the criticism burrow too deeply. She focused on the handful of messages from people who'd experienced similar struggles, or who said Ranger's story inspired them to volunteer or foster animals. She started responding personally to some, grateful for the lifeline their words offered. But the setbacks were real and sometimes brutal. Ranger developed a fever, sending Olivia and her team into a panic as they scrambled to rule out infection. For 2 days, he refused food and barely opened his eyes. Olivia stayed by his side through both nights, dozing with her head against his crate, refusing to leave him even for a shower. She coaxed him back with bits of broth and soft words, her own resolve hardening every time he seemed close to giving up. There were moments, too, when Olivia's own faith wavered. In the dark before dawn, with only the hum of machines and Ranger's uneven breaths for company, she sometimes wondered if she was doing more harm than good. What if she was blinded by her own stubborn hope? What if she was making Ranger suffer for her ideals? Yet every time she felt herself slipping into despair, Ranger would do something small but undeniable. Open his eyes when she called his name, or nudge her hand with his nose, or thump his tail in the silence. Those moments were Olivia's lifeline, reminders that recovery wasn't a straight line, and connection sometimes mattered as much as any medicine. As Ranger's story spread, so did the scrutiny. Hospital administrators scheduled another review. Dr. Bennett, caught between supporting Olivia and defending the hospital's reputation, grew more distant, though he never openly told her to stop. The tension between compassion and protocol grew with every new setback, every uncertain step forward. But Olivia pressed on, bolstered by the growing community around Ranger's story. She saw firsthand that hope, once shared, could take on a life of its own, messy, imperfect, and fiercely resilient. And as autumn deepened, painting the Colorado woods in gold and rust, Olivia found herself more determined than ever. No matter how loud the critics, no matter how heavy the setbacks, she would not abandon Ranger, because some lives, no matter how broken, deserved to be fought for. 3 months after that fateful night in the Rockies, the animal hospital was no longer just a place for routine checkups or wildlife emergencies. Every day, a growing number of strangers peered in through the glass doors, holding their phones high, eager to catch a glimpse of the battered German shepherd who had survived the impossible. Ranger had become something more than a patient. He was a living symbol of hope and second chances, though the road there had been nothing but uphill. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Olivia, bleary-eyed from a night shift, stood at the edge of Ranger's custom therapy mat, holding her phone with shaking hands. She had grown accustomed to filming every milestone, but today's session felt different. The room hummed with quiet tension. An intern organizing supplies, Carla pretending to check a chart but really watching with barely disguised skepticism. Even Dr. Bennett passing through the doorway to observe, hands shoved deep in his lab coat pockets. Ranger struggled to rise, his hind legs trembling violently, as Olivia encouraged him in a low, soothing tone. "Come on, Ranger. You can do this. I'm right here, just one more try." For weeks, this scene had ended in frustration or near defeat. But today, something in Ranger's posture shifted, a stubborn set of the jaw, a gathering determination in his eyes. He heaved upward, forelegs straightening, hindquarters quivering with effort. For a breathless 5 seconds, Ranger stood upright, unassisted, his head swaying, gaze locked on Olivia's face. "Yes!" Olivia cried, voice cracking with joy. She barely remembered to hit record, but somehow her phone captured it all. The crowding of staff, the stunned silence, Ranger's wobbly triumph, her hands fluttering to her mouth as tears threatened to spill over. That video, unedited and raw, would be the spark that set everything ablaze. Within 24 hours, Ranger's first stand racked up tens of thousands of views. By the end of the week, national outlets were calling, eager for interviews. News vans rolled up outside the hospital, cameras zooming in on Olivia as she walked Ranger through his morning therapy, microphones thrust into her face as she tried to explain what made this dog so special. It wasn't just the medical miracle, it was the connection, the stubborn faith that had defied the odds and rewritten the rules. But with the spotlight came pressure, some of it supportive, much of it skeptical, and a few voices outright hostile. Online, people argued over ethics, resource allocation, and the question of whether Ranger was an exception or a distraction from the hospital's true mission. Donations flooded in, accompanied by messages of thanks from families with disabled pets, animal lovers, and even children inspired to start fundraising drives at their schools. The hospital's board, unused to such attention, called an emergency meeting. Olivia was summoned to the conference room, where 10 faces, some smiling, some tight with concern, awaited her. Dr. Bennett opened the meeting, his voice formal. "We're here to discuss both the immediate and long-term impacts of the Ranger case. Dr. Walker, please present your findings." Olivia, exhausted but unwavering, stood her ground. She projected her daily logs, charts showing Ranger's incremental progress, the stack of online support, and yes, the influx of donations that had helped keep the hospital solvent through a particularly rough quarter. "I broke protocol," she admitted. "I did what I believed was right, not what the rule book told me to do. If you want to reprimand me, go ahead. But I believe this case proves something. Hope is not just an emotion. It's a catalyst. When we choose compassion, people respond." A tense silence followed. Then a board member, previously a harsh critic, cleared his throat. "Frankly, the attention this case has brought is unprecedented. The public support is difficult to ignore. I may not agree with your methods, Dr. Walker, but I can't argue with the results." Another board member asked about the precedent this might set for future cases. "Will we be expected to save every hopeless animal?" Olivia met the question head-on. "No. But maybe we should review the criteria for hopeless. Ranger wasn't just a dog with a slim chance. He was a dog with a will to fight, and someone willing to fight with him. Isn't that worth reconsidering? Dr. Bennett's eyes softened as he nodded in cautious agreement. The world has seen what we do here, and for once, it's not about failure. It's about the possibility that even the most broken cases aren't lost causes. The board, after a heated discussion, voted, narrowly but decisively, to support Olivia's ongoing efforts. New guidelines would be drafted, outlining a path for rehabilitation in exceptional cases, provided they were carefully documented and funded. The decision sent a ripple of relief through the hospital staff. But it was Ranger's slow, determined march down the hallway, flanked by staff and supporters, that truly marked the shift. Public enthusiasm blossomed. Gifts poured in, blankets, treats, heartfelt letters. A local artist painted Ranger's portrait, which was hung in the hospital's main lobby. Volunteers signed up in record numbers, eager to help not only with Ranger, but with other long-term rehabilitation cases. Yet Olivia knew there were still battles ahead. She spent long evenings answering emails from critics, penning careful responses, explaining her choices without apology. She continued to document Ranger's ups and downs, sharing both the setbacks and the victories, determined to show the world the messy, complicated reality of hope. One night, as she sat beside Ranger in the glow of his therapy lamp, Olivia let her hand rest on his scarred back. The hospital had changed, the world had watched, and the rules had shifted, if only a little. Ranger's journey wasn't finished, but Olivia was no longer fighting alone. Sometimes, she realized, all it takes is one act of courage to change everything, and sometimes, hope really is contagious. By early spring, a change had settled over the Colorado Wildlife Hospital, a shift in the air that couldn't be traced to any one event, but rather to a gradual unraveling of old habits. Ranger's story, now a local legend, was the quiet pulse of the place. Visitors snapped selfies with the mural in the lobby. Children whispered as they walked past Ranger's outdoor run, wide-eyed at the sight of a dog, who, against all odds, still faced the world on his own four legs, however shaky they might be. But for Olivia, change was a heavier, more personal thing. The attention was flattering, the donations critical, yet something gnawed at her every time she looked at Ranger curled on his custom bed near her office. He'd made it. He'd survived and inspired. But his story still didn't have the ending he deserved. His hindquarters were permanently weakened. There would be no adoption, no family to claim him. Officially, he was a hospital resident, a euphemism for animals who couldn't be released or rehomed. Olivia couldn't accept that as enough. On a chilly Monday morning, she met with the board and pitched an idea that had kept her up for weeks. Let's build something for him, a sanctuary space. Not just for Ranger, but for every animal who needs a last-chance home. Somewhere safe, outdoors, where they can experience freedom and comfort, even if they'll never be wild or normal again. Surprisingly, the board agreed. The outpouring of public support had given the hospital breathing room for the first time in years. Local contractors donated time and materials. Volunteers, many of them inspired by Ranger's journey, showed up every weekend with hammers and dog treats, helping to fence in a sprawling patch of meadow and woods behind the main building. Olivia spent hours designing enrichment features, ramps for mobility, pools for wading, shaded hides for privacy. Ranger watched all the work from the window, ears perked, tail occasionally thumping against the floor, as if he sensed the change coming. Finally, on a soft April afternoon, the new sanctuary opened. Olivia led Ranger through the double gates, her hand steady on his harness. He hesitated, then stepped out onto the fresh grass, sniffing at the breeze, testing each paw as if rediscovering the world. Staff gathered, phones poised to record every step, but Olivia kept her focus on Ranger's face. When he finally made it to the center of the enclosure and looked up at the mountains beyond, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of pride, or perhaps relief, that made all the struggle worthwhile. For a while, life settled into a new rhythm. Ranger adapted to his outdoor domain, finding sun-warmed corners for naps and shaded patches for watching squirrels. Olivia split her days between surgeries, outreach, and long walks with Ranger along the perimeter fence. Each night, she updated Ranger's followers, sharing photos of his latest adventures and musing about what made second chances so important. One evening, just after sunset, Olivia was locking up when she heard Ranger barking sharply from the sanctuary. It wasn't his normal bark. This was urgent, insistent, almost commanding. She hurried outside, Luis falling in behind her, flashlight beams dancing across the darkening meadow. Ranger was pressed against the far fence, ears high, body rigid with alertness. "What's he got?" Luis asked, eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. Olivia knelt, pressing her fingers into Ranger's thick fur. "Show me, buddy. What is it?" Ranger pawed at the fence, whining in short bursts, his gaze locked on a thicket of brush beyond the property. Olivia listened. At first, only silence. Then, a faint rustle. Something small, alive, shivering just out of sight. Heart pounding, Olivia called for Luis to grab gloves and a carrier. They pushed through the brush, Ranger watching with fierce intensity, and found the source. A litter of tiny, trembling puppies, their eyes barely open, clustered around a bloodied, half-conscious mother. Olivia felt her breath catch. The mother dog, skeletal and battered, stared up at her with the same raw plea Ranger had given months before. "Oh my God," she whispered. "How did you even know, Ranger?" Luis shook his head in disbelief. It's like he could sense them. With gentle hands, Olivia and Luis lifted the pups and mother into the carrier, moving slowly so as not to startle or hurt them. Ranger whined softly as they passed, pressing his nose to the mesh as if in greeting or solidarity. Back inside, the medical team sprang into action. The puppies were hypothermic, hungry, but otherwise healthy. The mother, though battered, had a fighting chance. Olivia stayed with her late into the night, soothing her as she nursed, feeling Ranger's story looping forward. One outcast rescuing another. Word spread quickly, and the community's response was swift. Donations poured in specifically to support the new rescues, and volunteers lined up to help with round-the-clock care. The sanctuary was expanded again. New enclosures built for animals in need of special attention. Paralyzed foxes, orphaned deer, even a bald eagle with a mangled wing. And Ranger, he became more than a mascot. He was a guide, a beacon for the lost. Whenever a new animal arrived, he was the first to sniff, to welcome, to watch with wise amber eyes. Olivia marveled at the way he moved through his world now, neither broken nor bitter, but dignified, a survivor forging a legacy far bigger than his own story. As spring melted into summer, Olivia realized that Ranger's greatest gift wasn't his survival. It was his ability to inspire courage and compassion in everyone he touched. He had changed the hospital, the community, and Olivia herself. Through his silent pleas and quiet resilience, he'd taught them all that no one was beyond hope, and that sometimes the most wounded among us are the ones best equipped to lead. In the gentle dusk, Olivia leaned against the sanctuary fence, Ranger at her side, watching the rescued puppies tumble through the grass. She thought about all the moments of doubt, the near losses, the small victories that had added up to something remarkable. The old rules had faded. In their place was a new order, one built not on protocol, but on love and second chances. And so Ranger, the outcast, became the heart of a sanctuary, a place where every broken soul could find safety, dignity, and maybe, if they were lucky, a future brighter than anyone dared hope. In the weeks that followed the dramatic discovery, the sanctuary came alive in ways Olivia had never imagined. The chorus of puppy yips and mewling, the clatter of volunteer boots, the gentle hum of laughter and quiet conversation. This was the sound of hope taking root. Ranger, once a battered outcast himself, now moved through his days with new purpose, alert to every arrival, every cry for help that echoed the one he'd once sent up into the cold Colorado night. The litter of puppies and their mother, named Daisy by one of the younger volunteers, became the center of the sanctuary's world. Daisy, despite her injuries, proved fiercely protective and deeply grateful, pressing her nose into Olivia's palm every morning as if to say thank you. Olivia marveled at Daisy's resilience. The puppies, 4 of them, all ears and wobbly legs, tumbled through their enclosure in a chaotic dance of curiosity and need. Ranger's role in their rescue quickly became legend among staff and volunteers. People whispered that he had a sixth sense for animals in distress, that he'd somehow known the little family was out there, shivering and alone. Olivia couldn't explain it, but she believed it. Ranger would often patrol the edges of the sanctuary, pausing at the fence line, listening intently to the wind and the rustle of branches. Sometimes, late at night, Olivia caught him staring up at the stars, as if communing with something only he could understand. The sanctuary itself expanded to keep up with the influx of rescues inspired by Ranger's story. The outpouring of support from the community meant new enclosures, more medical supplies, and a wave of eager volunteers. Some were local teenagers hoping for service hours, others retired ranchers who brought practical wisdom and strong hands, and a few were former skeptics, converted by the simple power of Ranger's perseverance. Olivia watched them all, heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Each new arrival brought fresh challenges. Some animals arrived terrified, others aggressive or withdrawn. There was Luna, a paralyzed fox who refused to eat until Ranger lay quietly beside her pen for hours, his calm presence soothing her trembling. There was Moose, a one-eyed mule deer fawn who bonded instantly with the smallest puppy, the two napping together in a sunbeam like old friends. The sanctuary became a tapestry of broken and mending souls, each with their own story, each leaving a mark on the others. Olivia noticed how the staff, too, were changing. Luis, once her skeptical mountain guide, now spent his off hours building enrichment structures, joking with volunteers and teaching kids how to gently feed a wary animal. Carla, who had once confronted Olivia about wasting resources, became the unofficial puppy wrangler, her stern facade softening every time she cradled a sleepy pup. The medical team, energized by the successes and even the setbacks, took extra time with every case, no longer content to simply follow protocol. Still, not every day was easy. Daisy's recovery was slow. Some nights she whimpered in pain, and Olivia sat with her in the darkness, whispering encouragement and promises that things would get better. 2 of the puppies battled respiratory infections, and there were moments when Olivia feared they wouldn't make it. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, sharper than ever. There were nights when she second-guessed everything, wondering if she was doing enough, if she'd risked too much on hope. But every dawn brought new evidence that her gamble was paying off. One morning, Olivia arrived to find Ranger waiting at the gate, tail wagging, as if eager to show her something. He led her to the puppy pen, where the smallest pup, runt of the litter, always a step behind, was standing on unsteady legs, barking for attention. Ranger licked the pup's face, then turned to Olivia with a look that seemed to say, "See, it's worth it." Moved by the daily miracles, Olivia decided to open the sanctuary's doors to the community, inviting families, school groups, and curious neighbors to witness the work firsthand. She gave tours, letting Ranger lead the way, introducing him as our first and greatest rescue. She watched as children gathered around, awestruck, hands pressed to the glass, faces lit with wonder as Ranger sat quietly beside them. The impact rippled outward. Donations increased, not just money but food, supplies, and time. Local businesses sponsored animal enclosures, and college students studying veterinary medicine flocked to intern under Olivia's guidance. Even the hospital board, once so skeptical, began to see the sanctuary not as a drain, but as a beacon, an example of what could happen when compassion guided action. One Saturday, as Olivia led a group of third graders past the fox enclosure, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Dr. Walker, do you think Ranger knows he's a hero?" Olivia knelt, smiling at Ranger, who sat regally beside her. "I think he just knows he matters, and that's the most important thing anyone can know." That night, after the last tour group had gone and the sanctuary was still, Olivia stood at the edge of Ranger's enclosure, watching him watch the stars. She felt a quiet sense of completion. Not the end of a journey, but the satisfaction of knowing they'd built something that would last. In the end, it was Ranger's example that drew people in and bound them together. He had shown that being broken wasn't the end, that every life was worth the fight. Olivia saw it in the faces of the children, the gratitude of the volunteers, and the peaceful way Ranger now lay in the grass, surrounded by those he'd helped save. In saving Ranger, Olivia had opened a door for countless others, and in helping them, she realized, Ranger had saved her too. A year passed, but Ranger's story showed no signs of fading. Instead, it grew, echoing out of the sanctuary and rolling across Colorado like a promise. Compassion, once set in motion, could change the world in ways no one expected. The sanctuary, which had begun as a single fenced enclosure for one battered German shepherd, now sprawled across several acres of rolling meadow and shaded woods. The air buzzed with life, injured eagles relearning to stretch their wings, a three-legged coyote racing a band of orphaned goats, fox kits wrestling beneath the watchful eye of Luna, the paralyzed vixen who had once refused to eat. Olivia sometimes stood by the window in her office, cup of coffee in hand, just to listen to the wild symphony, the chorus of second chances, the story of Ranger's rescue, and the transformation that followed, had made its way into newspapers, radio segments, and even a national TV spot. People came from all over to see him, to volunteer, or to drop off food and blankets for the newest arrivals. Families with children on the autism spectrum made pilgrimages, hoping the gentle presence of the sanctuary's animals would spark connection. High schoolers volunteered for summer projects. Retired engineers came to help build new habitats. The place was alive with purpose, all rooted in that single act of defiance on a frozen mountain night. But perhaps the most astonishing effect was what happened beyond the sanctuary's gates. Olivia soon found herself invited to speak at veterinary conferences, animal welfare panels, and even government task force meetings. She never considered herself a public speaker. Her voice always trembled at the start, hands sweaty as she clutched the podium. But the moment she told Ranger's story, the room would quiet, eyes fixed on her, all pretense melting away. Her first big invitation came from the Colorado Veterinary Medical Association. Olivia stood in front of hundreds of experts, her slides flicking from Ranger's battered, mud-caked body beneath the collapsed bridge to his first, trembling steps in the hospital. And finally, to a shot of him lying in the sun with a rescued puppy curled against his flank. "We're taught that medicine is about science, protocols, and cost-benefit analysis," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. "But sometimes, the most important variable is the one we can't measure: hope. That's what Ranger taught us. Compassion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And if we let it guide us, we can do more than save lives. We can change the culture." At the end, people rose to their feet. Some wiped away tears. Others, inspired by Olivia's conviction, approached afterward with ideas for their own sanctuaries or stories of animals they'd fought for against impossible odds. Olivia began traveling statewide, consulting with other wildlife centers and rural clinics, sharing not just medical strategies but the philosophy of courage and care that Ranger embodied. It didn't take long for the ripple to reach lawmakers. The state's animal rescue policies had long been criticized as inflexible, focused more on efficiency than empathy. But Ranger's case became the rallying point for reform. The governor's office requested Olivia's participation in a working group to review and update the guidelines for animal intervention. Sitting in the stately, echoing halls of the Capitol building, Olivia felt out of place among the suits and legal jargon. But when it was her turn, she spoke plainly. Sometimes protocol protects us. Sometimes it becomes a wall. The question is, are we willing to tear it down when an animal's life is on the line? Her advocacy, backed by the undeniable success of the sanctuary and the public's overwhelming support, led to the passage of the Compassionate Response Act. The new law required that injured animals, especially those found in borderline situations, be evaluated for potential rehabilitation before euthanasia could even be considered. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start, and Olivia knew that small cracks in the system could one day let in the light. Back at the sanctuary, the media attention never went to Ranger's head. He continued his daily patrols, greeting each new animal with quiet dignity, serving as a bridge between the wild and the wounded, the lost and the found. Olivia started taking him on visits to local schools and community events. The children flocked to him, running their fingers through his grizzled fur, listening with awe as Olivia told Ranger's story, how a moment of courage on a cold night had changed everything. She saw the spark in their eyes, a little more patience, a little more empathy, seeds of compassion planted in young hearts. Teachers wrote afterward, describing classroom discussions about animal welfare, the environment, and what it means to fight for something you believe in. Even adults who'd once scoffed at the idea of spending so much on one dog now brought their kids to the sanctuary, quietly donating or volunteering after hearing the story firsthand. The success inspired other rescues across the state. Small sanctuaries popped up in mountain towns and prairie communities, many run by former hospital staff or volunteers who had trained with Olivia. The movement was messy, full of setbacks and lessons, but it was growing. Proof that hope, once shared, could become unstoppable. And through it all, Olivia and Ranger stood at the center, a team who'd broken the rules, changed the narrative, and started a ripple that kept spreading, farther and farther, with every new life saved, and every heart moved by their story. By the time autumn painted the Rockies in a blaze of gold and scarlet, Ranger's story had become more than local legend. It was a catalyst, driving conversations and stirring change in circles Olivia never expected to reach. Now, as the leaves fell, the sanctuary hosted its most ambitious event yet, a public panel, bringing together the voices that had shaped Ranger's journey and the future of animal rescue in Colorado. The main hall was packed with people, Veterinarians, animal lovers, skeptical board members, local press, even a handful of state officials. At the front of the room, under the warm light, sat Olivia, Dr. Eric Bennett, and Marissa James, a senior official from the state's Animal Welfare Division. Ranger, aging but dignified, lay beside Olivia's chair, his head resting on her shoe, eyes closed in quiet contentment. Olivia looked out at the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest, every nerve humming. She had spoken at plenty of events over the past year, but this was different. This was home. This was her reckoning, with the rules, with the doubters, and with herself. Marissa James opened the panel. We're here tonight because one moment of compassion forced us to rethink what's possible, not just for one animal, but for our entire community. Dr. Walker, would you start by sharing your perspective? Olivia took a deep breath, glancing down at Ranger for courage. We all know protocol matters. It's there for a reason, to guide us, to protect resources, to ensure fairness. But sometimes protocol isn't enough. Sometimes you stand on a mountainside and look into a pair of eyes that remind you why you got into this work in the first place. She paused, the memory vivid, the cold, the fear, the quiet plea in Ranger's gaze. I broke the rules because I couldn't accept that his life had to end just because the system said so. In that moment, I realized rules should serve life, not the other way around. There was a hush, the room holding its breath. Dr. Bennett leaned forward, his voice carrying a new humility. I'll admit, I was Ranger's harshest skeptic. I've seen what happens when hope clouds judgment. I argued against Olivia, told her it was a waste of time and resources, that she was risking her career for one case. But I was wrong. He looked at Ranger, then at Olivia. What I witnessed wasn't just recovery, it was a kind of healing you can't quantify. The connection between them, the way Ranger responded to compassion and refused to give up, it changed me. Hope isn't naive. Sometimes it's the most practical tool we have. A ripple of emotion moved through the audience. Olivia felt the tension in her shoulders loosen, just a little. Marissa spoke next, her tone measured but warm. Ranger's case was the push we needed. We've already seen the impact. New guidelines for field evaluation, mandatory second opinions before euthanasia, more support for sanctuaries. But the biggest change isn't just in policy, it's in culture. Our staff now look for possibility before writing off a life. That's not just better for animals, it's better for us as people. A young vet in the audience raised her hand. But what about resources? What if compassion gets in the way of logic? Olivia smiled, recognizing a question she'd asked herself so many times. It's not compassion versus logic. It's compassion with logic. We're not saving every animal at any cost, but we're refusing to let fear or convenience be the reason we say no. Every case is evaluated. Every animal is seen as an individual, not just a statistic. Dr. Bennett nodded. And sometimes, compassion reveals possibilities, rules never anticipated. I've learned that if you listen to your team, to your heart, even to the animal, you'll find a way. Marissa added, the protocols haven't disappeared, but now they include a space for hope. The conversation continued, questions and answers flowing. Board members who had once demanded Olivia's resignation now asked how to expand sanctuary programs statewide. Donors shared how Ranger's story had inspired them to give and to act in new ways. Families who had adopted sanctuary animals stood up to share how those animals had transformed their homes, bringing empathy and joy. Near the end of the evening, Olivia was asked what she believed was the single greatest lesson from Ranger's journey. She didn't hesitate. Every act of courage, no matter how small, sends ripples outward. Sometimes you don't see the result for months or years. Sometimes you never see it. But if you lead with heart, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's scary, you can start something that grows far beyond you. Dr. Bennett leaned over, a rare smile crinkling his eyes. I used to think the best medicine was a steady hand and a clear mind. Now I know it's that, and a courageous heart. Marissa closed the panel with the new policy's final lesson. From this point on, Colorado requires that any animal in a questionable situation gets a real chance. A chance at rescue, a chance at rehabilitation. We owe that to them. We owe that to ourselves. The applause was thunderous, not just for the panel, but for the idea that compassion should have a seat at the table. Afterward, Olivia found herself surrounded by old friends, new allies, grateful families. Ranger, too, was swarmed by gentle hands and soft voices. Someone pressed a note into Olivia's palm. She opened it and read, "You changed our lives. Thank you for not giving up." As the evening wound down and the hall emptied, Olivia lingered by Ranger's side, stroking his weathered fur. She looked around at the sanctuary, the people, the animals, the energy that filled every corner, and felt a profound sense of peace. Maybe the rules would keep evolving. Maybe there would be setbacks and failures along the way. But something essential had shifted. A community, a system, even a culture. Ranger's plea for help had become a legacy, a living testament that every moment of courage, every act of compassion, matters more than we'll ever know. And as she turned out the lights, Olivia knew that the story wasn't finished. Not for Ranger, not for her, not for any of them. Years slipped by in the way only time can pass when you're living with purpose. Quietly at first, then all at once. The sanctuary grew, shifting with the seasons, the gold of autumn giving way to the silent hush of winter, then the jubilant riot of spring. Through it all, Ranger remained at the heart of it, his story woven into every fence post, every sunbeam that warmed the backs of the animals that followed in his footsteps. Ranger aged gracefully, his once bright eyes turning a wise, cloudy amber, his muzzle graying to match the dusting of snow on the sanctuary's fence line each December. His limp grew more pronounced, but it didn't slow him. If anything, it made his presence more dignified. Staff joked that Ranger had become the mayor of the place, settling disputes between young pups and fox kits with a gentle look, or simply lying at the center of the yard, keeping watch like a sentinel over his realm. Olivia felt the weight of each passing year more keenly than she'd expected. Ranger was her companion through sleepless nights and triumphant mornings, through heartbreak and healing. She found herself savoring every moment with him, from the slow walks at dusk to the quiet evenings by the fire, where he'd rest his head on her knee and she'd read aloud from her favorite books, certain he understood every word. One morning, as spring returned and wildflowers began to pepper the hills, Olivia awoke to find Ranger struggling to stand. He looked at her with calm acceptance, a deep trust in his gaze. Olivia felt a tightness in her chest as she carried him out to the sun-drenched yard, laying him on his favorite blanket beneath the old oak tree. Word spread quickly through the sanctuary. Staff, volunteers, even former critics and local neighbors gathered in silent tribute. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet circle of those whose lives Ranger had touched. The rescued animals seemed to sense it too. The sanctuary hushed, and the youngest pups curled at Ranger's side as if keeping vigil. As the sun set behind the Rockies, Ranger's breathing slowed. Olivia stroked his fur, whispering stories of the bridge, the wilderness, the sanctuary he'd inspired. When Ranger finally slipped away, It was with a soft sigh, surrounded by love, as gentle and peaceful as a spring breeze. The days that followed felt heavy, the sanctuary subdued. Olivia grieved, allowing herself to mourn, not just for the dog she'd saved, but for the friend who had saved her too. Ranger's loss was felt everywhere, in the empty spot by the fire, the stillness at morning rounds, the way the new arrivals sniffed the air, searching for his silent reassurance. But as the pain eased, something remarkable happened. Letters and cards arrived from all over the country, from families who had adopted sanctuary animals, from children who'd met Ranger at school visits, from strangers moved by his story. They shared photos of their own rescues, recounted acts of courage sparked by Ranger's journey, and thanked Olivia for refusing to give up when the rules said to walk away. A week after Ranger's passing, Olivia held a memorial at the sanctuary. People gathered beneath the old oak, sharing stories and tears, laughter and quiet reflection. Luis spoke first, recalling that cold mountain night when Olivia had insisted on breaking the rules. Carla told how Ranger had changed her mind about lost causes. Dr. Bennett, voice thick with emotion, admitted he'd never seen a single animal teach so much about hope, about the hidden power of compassion. When it was Olivia's turn, she took a deep breath and looked at the faces gathered around her. Staff, volunteers, board members, neighbors, families, children, and so many of the animals who owed their lives to the ripple that began with Ranger. Ranger taught us something simple but powerful. Real change doesn't start with a new policy or a big idea. It starts with a single act of courage. One moment when you listen to your heart, even if it means breaking the rules. When you choose compassion, especially when it's inconvenient or risky, you create hope. And hope grows. It touches lives. It builds communities. It changes everything. There were tears, but also smiles, and a shared sense that Ranger's life, however hard and uncertain, had left the world undeniably better. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Olivia announced that the sanctuary would now be called Ranger's Refuge. A new sign was raised, carved with Ranger's likeness and the sanctuary's new motto, "Where compassion writes the rules." In the days and weeks that followed, Olivia watched as new volunteers arrived, eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. She saw families bringing rescued animals back for visits, saw children proudly wearing Ranger's Refuge t-shirts, heard laughter and hope echoing through the meadows and barns. The sanctuary, once a radical experiment, had become a model, a place where empathy triumphed over bureaucracy, where every animal was given a name, a story, a chance. And as each new rescue found its place at Ranger's Refuge, Olivia knew the legacy endured. She often stood by the fence at dusk, watching the next generation of volunteers welcome a trembling dog or a frightened fawn, remembering that first night on the mountain, the eyes that asked for help, the decision that changed everything. Ranger was gone, but his lesson remained. Every act of compassion, no matter how small, has the power to shift a culture, to rewrite what's possible, and to leave behind a hope that will outlive us all. In the hush of evening, as the sky blazed with color and the sanctuary settled into peace, Olivia smiled, content. The story continued. One life, one choice, one moment at a time.